Who fired the first shot? Who lit the fuse between ice and empire? In late November 1939, 7 thunderous explosions shook the small border village of Mainila, just inside Soviet territory. Within hours, Moscow announced a grave accusation. Finland has attacked. But independent observers soon realized the shells came from the Soviet side, not Finland's. No Finnish troops were even nearby. It was a perfect performance, written, staged, and detonated by Stalin himself. A self-inflicted incident used as the pretext to launch the Winter War, later called the most illogical conflict of World War II. 3 days later, 1 million Red Army soldiers crossed the snow-covered frontier. They brought 6,500 tanks, 3,800 aircraft, and the confidence of a nation of 170 million people. Facing them stood only 340,000. Finns, farmers, hunters, students armed with 32 tanks and 114 old planes. If war were arithmetic, the answer seemed obvious. But Stalin had miscalculated 2 variables: cold and conviction. As Soviet columns advanced through Karelia, the temperature fell to 43 degrees Celsius. Ammunition froze in its chambers. Fuel turned to wax. Tanks stalled and died mid-forest. Soldiers from Odessa, Kiev, and the Volga fought not the enemy, but the weather itself. They dragged iron guns through knee-deep snow, hauling steel that refused to move. Meanwhile, the Finns became ghosts among the pines, fed by belief, sliding silently on skis, striking and vanishing. They owned the terrain. They owned the night. Stalin had expected to reach Helsinki within 2 weeks. After 1 month, over 60,000 Red Army soldiers were gone. Entire divisions shattered. Finnish losses, around 5,000, but their morale towered. Then came Suomussalmi. 11,000 Finns encircled and destroyed 2 Soviet divisions. More than 50,000 men. The frozen forests turned black with the shells of burned tanks. The silence heavier than gunfire. Compared with Stalingrad, which lasted 2 years, or Normandy, where thousands fell in a single day, the Winter War was brief, just 105 days, yet its impact cut deeper. Stalingrad was triumph through sacrifice. Normandy was liberation through unity. But Finland's struggle was survival through ingenuity. No allies, no reinforcements, no glory, only grit against overwhelming power. By March 1940, the impossible had happened. A tiny Nordic nation had forced Stalin to replace 3 generals, delay his entire northern campaign, and lose more than 130,000 soldiers. A defeat not only on maps, but in the Soviet idea of invincibility itself. Historians would later call it the war where the giant shot himself in the foot. A conflict born from deceit, ended in humility. And beneath the endless snow, one truth endured, that even in the coldest war, the human spirit does not freeze. How does a small nation defeat an empire 10 times its size? How does silence become deadlier than artillery? By December 1939, Soviet tanks rolled endlessly into the white wilderness of Karelia, confident, roaring, unstoppable. But the forests had their own design. The Finns called it Mahdi. In their language, it meant a bundle of firewood. In war, it became a doctrine. Cut the enemy into logs and burn them one by one. The Red Army advanced in massive columns, dragging supplies across frozen lakes, hauling guns that weighed more than the men pulling them. They were built for cities, not for woods. Stalin's war machine, perfect on paper, was collapsing in snow too deep for logic. Finnish scouts watched from the tree line. They struck at night. Small groups, 10 men, sometimes 5, gliding through the snow like shadows. They severed communication lines, ambushed convoys, disappeared before dawn. Every kilometer of road became a trap, every campfire a beacon of death. One Soviet general later admitted, "We never saw them, only the results." The Finns fought with almost nothing, outdated rifles, Molotov cocktails, and relentless precision. They didn't chase glory, they chased survival. Their bullets were rationed, their movements synchronized with the rhythm of the wind. Even the cold became a weapon. While Red Army soldiers froze, Finns built snow shelters, melted ice for tea, fed by belief and bitter coffee. At Suomussalmi, the myth was born. 11,000 Finns faced 2 Soviet divisions, over 50,000 men. For 3 weeks, blizzards howled and rifles cracked. The Finns cut the Soviet column into smaller and smaller mottes, encircling them like wolves. When it was over, the road to Rate was lined with frozen tanks, engines still smoking under snow. Over 25,000 Soviets were gone. Finnish losses, fewer than 2,000. The photographs from that battlefield, endless lines of silent corpses and shattered machinery, stunned the world. One British journalist wrote, "It was as if nature itself had taken Finland's side." Stalin's army was humiliated. In 6 weeks, he lost more men than the United States did in the entire Korean War. Commanders were replaced, maps redrawn, propaganda rewritten. The Red Army, meant to intimidate Europe, had become a warning to itself. Yet, this was no romantic victory. Behind the heroism lay exhaustion, frostbite, and grief. Towns burned. Civilians fled through ice roads that cracked under their feet. Still, the nation stood. Every farmhouse turned into a fortress. Every child learned to move in silence. Finland had no empire, but it had something stronger: the will to endure. When historians compare wars, they often cite Stalingrad for endurance, Dunkirk for courage, Midway for surprise. But the Winter War carried all 3 condensed into 105 days of frozen defiance. It was not fought for conquest, but for existence. No generals carved strategy in marble halls. They carved it in the snow, by firelight and instinct. By February 1940, the Red Army adjusted new tactics, heavier artillery, brutal persistence. But the lesson had already been written in ice. Overwhelming power means nothing if it cannot adapt. Yet, this was no romantic victory. Behind the heroism lay exhaustion, frostbite, and grief. Towns burned. Civilians fled through ice roads that cracked under their feet. Still, the nation stood. Every farmhouse turned into a fortress. Every child learned to move in silence. Finland had no empire, but it had something stronger: the will to endure. The world called it the Winter War. The Finns called it survival. But history remembers it as the moment when courage outlasted machinery and when snow devoured steel. What happens when a small nation wounds a giant? Does the giant retreat, or does he plan revenge? By February 1940, the Winter War had already rewritten the rules of modern combat. The Red Army, one of the largest military forces in human history, had been dragged into the snow, led by a country the size of a Soviet province. Stalin could not afford another humiliation. The world watched, breathless, as both sides braced for the final act. The Finns were exhausted, ammunition low, food rationed. Every man knew the next offensive could be their last. Yet even in desperation, they were fed by belief. The same faith that had turned hunters into soldiers now turned defeat into defiance. Meanwhile, in London and Paris, A different kind of war was being drafted, one fought not on the ice, but in the shadows. That secret plan carried a name whispered in war rooms: Operation Pike. Its logic was brutal. If the Soviet Union supplied oil to Hitler's war machine, then the Allies would strike at its heart, the oil fields of Baku, bomb them, paralyze the Red Army, and perhaps topple Stalin himself. The idea spread like wildfire among Allied strategists. Finnish intelligence, hardened by the Arctic War, joined the discussions. Documents declassified decades later revealed a shocking clause. A special unit, trained for deep infiltration, would move through Murmansk and into Moscow. Their ultimate goal: eliminate the Soviet leadership before another million men froze in the snow. History would later question whether this assassination plan ever moved beyond the drafting table. But for a moment, a brief, electrified moment, the idea of ending Stalin's rule seemed closer than ever. In the frozen forests of Finland, rumors reached the front lines. London is coming. Hope flickered through the ranks like fire through dry pine. But war, like winter, has no mercy for dreamers. In March 1940, France's collapse forced Britain to pull back. Operation Pike was shelved, its pilots grounded, its maps sealed in archives. The Red Army, reorganized and relentless, surged forward with overwhelming firepower. Town after town fell. Finnish trenches, once carved by belief, now cracked under artillery that shook the very ground. On the 13th of March 1940, the guns finally fell silent. The Moscow Peace Treaty was signed. Finland ceded 11% of its territory, including Karelia, and displaced nearly 420,000 civilians. Yet, they kept what mattered most: sovereignty. Stalin, though victorious on paper, called it the bitterest loss of my life. The war had lasted only 105 days, but it exposed everything: the Red Army's flaws, Stalin's paranoia, and the sheer endurance of a people who refused to disappear. In scale, it was smaller than the Somme, shorter than Verdun, but its meaning was greater than both: a reminder that courage is not measured in numbers, but in persistence against the impossible. After the war, the world moved on to France, to Britain, to new tragedies. Yet Finland endured, scarred but unbroken. Their forests still whisper of the nights when men fought without hope but not without honor. And in those whispers lies a question history still cannot answer. If Operation Pike had launched, if those bombers had reached Baku, if that shadow team had entered Moscow, would the course of World War II have changed forever? Or would the snow, as it always does, have swallowed their footsteps before the fire could begin? The Winter War ended where it began, in silence. But beneath that silence, the echo remains of a nation too small to conquer and a spirit too stubborn to die.